What's up, guys? Garrett Chappell here. Welcome to another episode of What's Your Thoughts? Today, we're going to be talking about camera basics for getting into photographing your hunts.
What's your thoughts?
What's your thoughts? I thought you were going to keep dancing there. So, yeah, I feel like this topic kind of came up because I feel like a lot, more than usual here lately, I've been getting messages, whether we're different areas, whether from a phone, social media, whatever, people asking camera-related questions, and typically it goes along something like this. Hey, I want to get into doing some photography, or I want to start photographing my hunts just for their own personal use, for capturing memories, just for their self, not to necessarily trying to dive into it on a professional level, but just on the fact of they want to know basically any tips or advice to how do I take good quality pictures of my hunts that I can keep to just for keepsakes or for memory purposes. And a lot of times that's gear related questions. A lot of times it's camera setting questions, and a lot of times it's just, frame and composition questions. So basically, quick rundown of very, very basic camera related to photographing your hunts.
It's vague because we could talk on that for hours trying to figure out, I guess basics would be camera basics. Depends on what kind of equipment you're using. I've seen a lot of people take some banging photos with a smartphone.
Yeah.
But if you're using like DSLR, I think a lot of these people need to take 2 steps back and just learn basics.
Right.
It's kind of where I started. When you first handed me a camera, it was like, you need to learn how to do these 3 things. You need to learn how to do shutter speed, ISO, and aperture, and learn that before you try to move to level 2.
Right. And that's to back that up a little bit. The first thing I'll do is when somebody says, if they don't even have camera gear, and a lot of questions is, hey, I want to start filming or photographing my hunts. What should I get? So
It's a hard question to answer.
It's a very tough question. It comes down to a couple different variables that I think you need to consider. One being your budget. Mm-hmm. How much are you wanting to spend? You don't have to spend a ton of money, but you're going to spend some money.
Yeah.
And then 2 is, what are you actually trying to capture?
If it's just photo, if there's video, is it range, short range?
That's right. Are you trying to do wildlife photography? Or are you just trying to take pictures in the blind, or a picture of your dog, or, so those variables come into play when you're talking about your lenses. Do you need a long lens? Do you need a wide lens? Do you need something that kind of does a little bit of both? Because a lot of times if somebody's just going to buy stuff, they're not going to go out and buy 3 or 4 lenses right off the bat. Usually it's going to be 1, maybe 2, right off the bat. I'll suggest to somebody, depending on what they're wanting to do, but get a wide angle lens and get something that's kind of that medium. So different brands are different millimeter length or whatever, but something between that 16 to 35 and then something that's like that 24 to 105. Like, I think that's the 2.
I think it also comes down to 2. Like, are you talking about like documenting more like the blind stuff or like the animal?
Right.
Because
that changes things.
I would say like a lot of photos we take of like in the blind stuff, wide looks great.
Yeah.
Out the gate. Anything you can do, with a shallow depth of field and you can shoot wide, it's just going to look good.
Sure.
Unless you get too wide, it starts bubbling, but start getting that warp. But if you're talking about like an animal, then I think you need to stay away from wide. You still need a fast lens,
right? And that's why I said it depends on what you're
doing,
to do.
I guess.
Right.
And like for us, we have to do both and cover both. And a lot of times, people see our photos or videos. What they don't understand is we usually have 2 cameras going. We usually have a long lens and a wide lens on 2 different bodies in the blind with us most of the time.
Right. Right. The second part that I would kind of jump into is the guy that says, hey, I already have some camera gear. How can I make my stuff better? the first thing that I
Camera
ask right
basics.
out the gate is, are you shooting in manual? And are you shooting raw?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, these guys aren't shooting manual,
No.
and most of the time they're not even shooting raw. So after I answer that question of you need to learn how to shoot manual for a million different reasons. But to sum up, manual is shooting in complete manual mode gives you complete 100% control of your camera. When you're in these auto settings, your camera makes those decisions for you. Sometimes they're right. A lot of times they're wrong.
Yep. And sometimes they make you the grain man.
Right. And so that was one thing that you said when you first got started. The first thing that I told you was you need to learn 3 things.
Camera basics.
You need to learn those camera basics, which is the shutter speed, the aperture, and the other one.
ISO.
The ISO.
Yeah, we don't talk about that one. I think that people misunderstand camera basics as, oh, I learned what those 3 do or what they are and how to work them. I'm ready to go. No, because there's step 2 before you get into taking a lot of photos is composition.
Right.
And that's something that
And really,
that right there can make or break if you're an auto.
And framing and composition, I was going to say, you can still be shooting in auto as long as you can figure out that framing and composition. You can still make great pictures.
Yeah.
But I think the sooner you can get in that full manual mode is going to let you to have, once you learn those basics, it lets you produce what you're trying to produce versus
Absolutely.
just taking what the camera gives you. But yes, framing and composition.
Rule of thirds.
That's the number one thing that I would always golden spiral.
I've tried to get back
Rule
to
of
the
thirds.
spiral more. I didn't go off of that a whole lot. Past couple of times I've used the camera, I've tried to pre-think that out a little bit.
And just even to like break it down, very, very basic. I think one of the number one things that I think that a beginner photographer makes is they want to just, we'll use a dog, for instance. That's pretty common in waterfowl photography. Send your dog on this retrieve. He's running back with a bird in his mouth. You want to take a picture of him. The number one mistake I see people doing, they're standing up, taking pictures of that dog.
Get on the dog's level.
That dog, your subject, you want, now this isn't complete biblical here because you can always change things, but the majority of the time you want your camera to be at the eye level of your subject for the most part. So your dog is only a foot off the ground, 2 foot off the ground. You don't need to be holding that camera 6 foot in the air taking a picture of it. Instantly, if you change 2 things, dog running, standing up, taking a picture, and you say, how do I make this look better? There's 2 things very quickly you can do. For one, you're standing up. For 2, your dog is in the middle of that picture. Get down on his level, put that dog in the bottom third. Boom.
Out the gate, it's already going to look better.
Like, it would just, those 2 quick little adjustments didn't change nothing on the camera, but just 2 things, and you take a picture from amateur to professional. Like, it just night and day difference.
Definitely.
Like, that's just one thing I feel like that 9 times out of 10 a new photographer don't
It's
think
overlooked.
about.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it too comes down to, once you've learned those settings, is what are you trying to photograph? Because if I'm trying to photograph a duck versus a turkey, that's 2 different speeds. There's 2 different things I've got to worry about there, because I don't want a duck coming in and he's just all blurry because it's going mock Jesus and it's a teal. That's a hard thing to shoot versus a turkey that's barely moving. And learn that, and the best way I can tell you to learn that, if you're wanting to shoot like waterfowl, because that's mostly probably what you're hearing, is you don't have to go on a duck hunt to practice shooting birds.
Right.
Go shoot seagulls.
Yeah.
Go shoot anything that flies and moves. Try tracking. Try getting focus. Try seeing if you got your shutter speed at a right, high enough to be able to freeze frame that and get wings in motion to freeze.
Right.
There's a lot of small things like that you can practice on, and
I think that's another thing.
I did that. I went and took pictures of seagulls and stuff.
I think that's another thing that kind of popped out when you said that is people getting blur in taking pictures of something in motion. So what's your first thing that comes to thought when somebody says, every time I take this picture, it's blurry?
Shutter speed.
Shutter speed. So what's your shutter speed at? What's your rule of thumb on
ducks?
If you're going to be filming ducks flying,
1250
minimum.
That's my goal. I will cheat that if I have to, but 1250 is if I'm at 1250, I'm happy.
Yeah. So my goal is 16, which is pretty close. That's only the next click up. But yeah, I try to see when you're talking about wings that are moving super fast, that shutter's going to have to be cranked. And I think that comes in that camera basics thing of knowing what those things do.
Because
and how to control
that,
them.
You've got to compensate the others.
Right.
So it's what will you give up to get that shutter speed?
Right.
Because you don't want the grain, man. You don't want it to be super, 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 super dark.
Right.
So you have to kind of play the balances, and that's what I'm saying. It's not like, I think auto settings are great for people who just want to take pictures of their kid opening presents.
Right.
I think it is a horrible thing to have on a camera sometimes if you're trying to get into photography, because it makes you complacent.
Yeah.
That you just rely on that. One thing I think gets overlooked a lot too is like metering.
Yeah.
Learn about light metering. Learn about how your camera is metering, if it's spot metering, if it's, zone metering, whatever it may be.
You might be getting a little bit above basics, but yeah.
Well, that's not what I'm saying. Not in basics. I'm just saying for what we're doing. If somebody's already got camera gear, they already know the camera basics. They're taking photos, but it gets overlooked a lot.
Yeah.
Metering gets overlooked a ton.
Yeah. So to wrap this up, to not draw it out, I wanted to keep
we can make this an hour if you want.
I wanted to keep it completely basic. I think basic rule of thumb overview is, like we said, learning those camera basics. Aperture, shutter speed,
ISO.
I don't know why I keep forgetting ISO. I'm like, what is that other one? Learn those three things, what they do, how to control them. Shoot RAW. We didn't even talk about RAW versus JPEG, but it's basically you're shooting an uncompressed version. You're shooting a much larger file with a lot more information, so when you go to edit, you can get a much higher quality picture.
We can get the bit rate and all that other stuff. That's a whole other
quick way to sum that up. So those two things, and then basically your basic framing and composition, learning how to frame a shot correctly.
And there's thousands and thousands of
YouTube
videos.
Is a great thing. We were never taught by anybody outside of YouTube. So take that for what it's worth. We probably don't have any grounds to tell anybody anything, but I guess we're just that prime example to show you that information's out there.
Absolutely.
YouTube it, learn it. If you got any questions, feel free to ask us. We get people that ask us all the time. Yeah. We're more than happy to answer any questions we can. If we can't answer it, we'll find somebody who can. We'll point you in the direction of where you can learn that more about that thing. And that's pretty much it.
Camera basics.
Take your camera with you.
Yes, everywhere.
Take it with you. Take a shot. Make those memories. We'll catch you on the next one.
See you.